Hello all you crazy people out there, my name is Michael, I like wizards and dragons and making games, and let's talk about multiple render targets again. So I made a video on these about 2 years ago in the beginning of 2021, and since then there has been a small but rather important change to the way that multiple render targets work in GameMaker, and I don't think a lot of people are actually aware that it happened. It was never mentioned in the update notes officially anywhere, but it is a change that can be rather useful, and I think it bears talking about. So a quick rundown on what multiple render targets are for. So you can render multiple copies of a scene, and you can do that either by drawing the scene multiple times separately with a different shader, or you can render the same scene multiple times using a single rendered pass and a single shader, and you can do that by outputting different color information to different render targets, as they're called. So this here is going to render both the diffuse color information of the 3D scene here with the good old-fashioned Toon shader and Toon link over here. And this is just the diffuse color information using color from the lighting calculations and the textures. And this is the same scene rendered, but with the 3D normals being used as the color information instead. And this turns out to be important in a lot of advanced rendering techniques if you're doing something like a deferred renderer, or if you're doing something with SSAO or any kind of global illumination. Things like that end up using a lot of information about a 3D scene that has been encoded to a texture that isn't just the literal color information of a pixel. Things like normals and depth and specular color information, perhaps. And it's really nice to be able to draw that information in a single shader without having to re-render the entire scene multiple times. So in the land of GameMaker, previously this would have been a bit of a chore, because you can totally have multiple render targets in the GLSL shader language, but until relatively recently, it's a long story, it's honestly kind of a dumb story, but GameMaker's shader compiler just would not accept multiple render targets written in GLSL. This comes down to some, let's say, shortcomings in the way that the GLSL shader code would have been translated into HLSL, which is what's actually used on Windows. And it was honestly one of those things that if you were to come up to me and say, hey, GameMaker sucks, why are you using this engine? I would say, honestly, it kind of does suck. That we have to do things this way. And as a result of that, things such as saying gl_frag data index 1 equals some value just would not have compiled in GameMaker.
Hey.
In GLSL. And if you wanted to do something like what I had on screen a minute ago with Toon link and all that, you would have had to rewrite your entire shader in HLSL to run that on Windows, and then use the GLSL version for pretty much everything else. It was a pain, it was annoying, it required writing in HLSL, which isn't like a bad language, but well, it's a lot more verbose than the equivalent GLSL, and you have to do a lot more typing to do simple things, such as multiplying matrices, which is kind of a pain. And in HLSL, you can, of course, do multiple render targets perfectly easily with the pixel shader output structs, SV target 0, 1, and so on. And that changed. And this is actually something that first appeared in GameMaker over a year ago. We're not exactly sure when, because again, it wasn't official. But about a year ago, let's say, someone inside the company of Yo-Yo Games in the city of Dundee in Scotland did something to the shader compiler that allows this to actually work on Windows without issue. And if I were to run the game now, and if I were to actually use this shader. Let me swap out all instances of the HLSL Toon shader for the GLSL Toon shader so that we're actually using it. There we go. If I were to run this shader and compile this shader, and this isn't actually going to produce quite the same result as the HLSL version, is it? Because this isn't like rendering the normal, but this will actually compile, which is really nice. So this is the scene it's rendering. We've got the outlines and everything. This is not actually the exact same shader code as was in the HLSL version. I guess this was an older version of the shader, like before I included like the actual lighting calculations or something like that. And if I were to view the secondary surface, GL_frag data index 1, we've got a solid red color instead of the actual normals. But we can change that, and we no longer have to have separate versions of our or MRT shaders for GLSL and HLSL, which is really nice because maintaining two of the exact same thing is never never makes development easy. So, if we wanted to bring some of these changes over, can I just real quickly take the world normal and squeeze that into v underscore world normal times 0.5 plus 0.5, and that should allow us to actually render the normals. All right, there we go. So this is more or less the equivalent to the HLSL version of the shader, and the outlines are more detailed now because they're actually like using the normal information of the scene instead of just like where things are, which makes them look a little better, I think. So I said this first appeared about a year ago, and I did not make a video on it then, and the reason for that was that it was technically unofficial. And its status when it first happened, I believe, I forget who first noticed it. I think it was Exor first noticed that this worked. When we asked Yo-Yo Games about this, they said that it was unofficial and that we shouldn't rely on it because it could potentially change at any moment in the future in a GameMaker update. But the reason that I'm making a video on it now is that, as you can see, the version of GameMaker that I'm using now, the long menu, the long-term stable version of GameMaker is now out, and this is now unlikely to change. So for the duration of the 2022 long-term support version of GameMaker, everything that's in it now, unless it's like a critical security bug in like the HTTP features or something like that, everything that's in the LTS version of GameMaker now is unlikely to change. So you're not at risk of seeing GLSL MRTs like patched out of GameMaker for at least another year, or until however long this version is like, you know, long-term supported. And I can't make the same guarantees for the regular stable versions of GameMaker. I can't make any guarantees for the beta versions of GameMaker, obviously. There actually was an incident in, I believe, the 2022.6 version of GameMaker where this just randomly did stop working. And everyone who was relying on this feature at that point in 22.6 was suddenly out of luck, and they had to either go back to an old version or they had to rewrite all their shaders that did this in HLSL, which is generally what most of them were trying to avoid having to do in the first place. And, well, one, they came back, obviously, in 2022.8, GLSL MRTs were back, which sort of does indicate that Yo-Yo Games does intend this to work in the future, and that there's probably a good chance that it's not actually going to go away even in the stable version. And again, we are now in the LTS version. This is the version of GameMaker that you're probably using if you want to work on a long-term project anyway. And at this point, I should be able to make this video and tell people to do this without worrying about it being obsolete in like another 2 months or whatever. So, this really is just a minor edit on one of the previous like GameMaker Toon Shader project repositories, but I will have a link to it down in the video description anyway. This is not a long video, this is more of a news update thing. I've done a bunch of those recently. The LTS version of GameMaker plus the 2022-11 betas have made my job interesting, to say the least. Use this power wisely. I'm going to stop now. My name is Michael. I like wizards and dragons and making games. I try to post about 2 game dev videos a week, one tutorial like this, one let's make a game, and I was hoping to have a longer tutorial out this Saturday, but I turned out to not be home very much this week, so I didn't really get time to work on that. I'll see if I can make up for that next week. I hope you all found this useful, and I will see you all later. Special thanks to Army Armbuster, DJ Gibbles, Edward Holt, GameMaker, Harold Guidry, Jonathan Bernardez, Kiexi, Sindra Larson, Squarecrow, The Oz, and Zenjamin for supporting these videos. If you want to support the channel, head on over to the Patreon page down in the video description to join the fun.